Hello and welcome back. Do you remember the first time you read Wuthering Heights? And more importantly, how old were you when you read it? Because I've realised something over the years. This book does not change, but us as readers absolutely do. And this feels particularly timely because this February I'm revisiting Wuthering Heights purely as a novel. I'll be sharing my reading reflections, slowing it right down and thinking aloud and really paying attention to what Emily Brontë actually wrote without cinematic flourishes or dramatic music, just the words on the page. At the same time, there's a lot of conversation happening around this new film adaptation. The director Emily Brontë has said that her version is shaped by how the book made her feel when she first read it at the age of 14 years old. That emotional teenage response has sparked a lot of debate, particularly because many of us encountering this story now as adults with very different life experiences and very different instincts. I mean, when I was a teenager, I thought Heathcliff was dark and mysterious and misunderstood and just very intense. The sort of man who just needed to be loved properly and then everything would just fall into place. And I'm sure many of us were encouraged to see him that way, helped along by adaptations and dramatic imagery and of course the idea of doomed romance. But reading the novel now, as an adult, I see something very different. I see warning signs everywhere. I feel uneasy, and more than that, I feel protective. I do not want this story softened or romanticised, especially not for younger readers. So in this video, I'm not here to review the film, and I'm not here to argue about casting or visuals. What I want to do is something quieter and I think more interesting. I want to look at how Wuthering Heights reads when you come to it young and how it reads when you come back to it later. What changes, what doesn't, and why certain things become impossible to ignore with age. This is not about judgment, and I've said that throughout this month. It's about perspective and about what happens when we return to a book we thought we already understood. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get into this. So yes, I am indoors, but also some of this filming is outdoors. That is because I had really good intentions to go back out and about and do some more filming. Apart from it feels like it's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights here in Yorkshire. We have no arcs yet, but we feel like we're on the brink of building one. It's just rained so much and constantly as well. There's so much water in the fields and the poor animals in the fields at the moment, they are absolutely sodden wet. So I really did try, guys, but it's pretty miserable out there. So I'm afraid I came back here, snuggled down in my room where it's warm and dry and I can have a constant flow of tea. Because what I didn't want to do was get so miserable that by the end of this video I'm like, yeah, whatever, just yeah, whatever. Because I really enjoy what I talk about and I really enjoy the topics. So recording a video in the damp and cold and wet sometimes is a bit too much. So I'm afraid I've wimped out, I'm back home. So in my last video about Wuthering Heights, and if you haven't seen it, I'll put a link in description and on the screen. I went to Easby Abbey and it was beautiful. It was foggy. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. And when I came back to the car after recording it, I thought, I think I'll come back to do my next video because I didn't show you everything. There was a little bit that didn't get caught on camera, and that is next door to the Abbey. It's a beautiful little church called St Agatha's. And it's very traditional, very small, very cute. And I just had to take you round. So I headed back there with my trusty camera in the rain to give you a glimpse of the beautiful church next door. When many of us first meet Heathcliff, we meet him through a very particular lens. He is brooding, he is passionate, and he has suffered. And in literature more generally, especially the stories many of us has encountered when we are sort of young, that combination often signals romance rather than danger. And I'm not saying Wuthering Heights is written for a young audience, no, it absolutely is not. But when you first encounter Heathcliff as a teenager reader, it is very easy to read him through patterns we've already recognised. The dark, wounded outsider, the misunderstood man, the idea that love, if it is intense enough, will reach him and redeem him. As a teenager reader, it's easy to interpret his anger as pain, his cruelty as trauma, and his silence as depth. We are encouraged both culturally and through later adaptations to believe that love will fix him. That if Catherine had chosen differently, if society had been kinder, if circumstances had shifted just a little, everything might have been saved. I know that was certainly how I read it at that age. But even within the novel itself, Emily Brontë never presents Heathcliff as merely wounded. From the very beginning, he is capable of deliberate cruelty. He listens, he remembers, he plans, he does not simply lash out in a moment of uncontrolled emotion. He stores grievances and he waits. We see this early on in the way he treats Hindley, not simply responding to mistreatment, but taking satisfaction in later domination. We see it in the calculated way he speaks to and about others, and the ability to endure humiliation not with forgiveness, but with the promise of revenge. As he later tells Nelly, "I'm trying to settle how I pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait, if I can only do it at last." I mean, that line matters. It shows intention, patience, choice. His suffering explains him, but it does not excuse him. And Emily Brontë is very careful about that distinction. Heathcliff is not dangerous because he's been hurt. He's dangerous because he decides what to do with that hurt. And as an adult reader, that difference becomes impossible to ignore. What once looked like depth can begin to look like fixation. And what once felt romantic can begin to feel threatening. And the novel has not changed at all. Only us readers. This is often where the rereading of Wuthering Heights begins to feel uncomfortable, and also where it starts to feel honest. This is often where the rereading of Wuthering Heights begins to feel uncomfortable, and also where it starts to feel honest. Rereading Wuthering Heights as an adult, it becomes much harder to romanticise Heathcliff's behaviour. The qualities that once felt intense or tragic begin to look deliberate, sustained and harmful. Take his treatment of Isabella. I mean, this is not doomed romance, it is abuse. Heathcliff marries her not because he loves her, but because she is useful to him. She is a means of hurting Edgar and asserting power over Catherine's world. And once Isabella is legally and socially trapped, he makes no effort to disguise his contempt. Isabella herself is very clear about this, and in her letter to Nelly, she describes her marriage as a frightful nightmare and speaks of Heathcliff as someone who has no pity and no love. She tells us that he delights in humiliating her and that he mocks her fear and that she lives in constant misery. Crucially though, the novel never undercuts her account. There is no later revelation that reframes this as misunderstood or exaggerated, because Emily Brontë lets Isabella's testimony stand. And as an adult reader, that matters. We are not invited to excuse Heathcliff here, we are asked to witness what he does. The same is true of the treatment of Hareton. Heathcliff does not simply fail this child through neglect. He actively recreates the conditions of his own childhood suffering in order to punish Hindley beyond the grave. He denies Hareton's education, affection and self-respect, not because he cannot provide them, but because he chooses not to. Nelly explains this plainly when she observes that Heathcliff took pleasure in thwarting his desires and degrading him. Hareton is kept ignorant on purpose. His roughness is cultivated, and Heathcliff wants him to grow up believing he is inferior because that belief is the real revenge. This is not emotional chaos, it's sustained harm inflicted with intent. And perhaps most unsettling of all is Heathcliff's relationship to Catherine herself. He does not want her to be happy, he wants her to be his. Even in death, his desire is not for her peace, but for her presence at any cost. I mean, when he cries, "Be with me always, take any form, drive me mad," it's often quoted as the height of romantic devotion. But read closely, it is terrifying. He's asking her to haunt him, to deny both of them rest. His grief is not softened by memory or love. It is possessive, consuming and endless. And as an adult reader, this stops feeling romantic and starts feeling really claustrophobic. Love here does not open space for the other person. It closes in on them. And this is often the moment when Heathcliff shifts quietly from decisively from tragic figure to dangerous one. Not because his suffering disappears, but because we can no longer pretend that suffering justifies what he does to others. The novel does not ask us to stop feeling for Heathcliff, but it does ask us to stop excusing him. And how we respond to that request often changes as we age. Catherine Earnshaw is one of those characters who quietly changes as we do, even if the words on the page never move. When we meet her as a younger reader, she's often thrilling. I mean, she's wild, she's uncontainable, and she climbs walls, she runs across the moors, she laughs too loudly, she feels too much. She seems trapped in a world that is trying to civilise her before she is ready, and it is very easy to side with her rebellion. And then there is the line, the one almost everyone remembers, "I am Heathcliff." When you're young, that sentence can sound like destiny, like passion so deep it erases the self. Two souls recognising each other across class, cruelty and circumstances. It feels romantic, dramatic, almost noble, as though loving him is her truest, most authentic act. But even in that same speech, Catherine tells us something else. She admits that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her. She understands exactly how society works, exactly what she would lose and exactly what she is choosing to prioritise. But as a younger reader, that contradiction can slip past unnoticed. As an adult, it becomes impossible to ignore, because when you read Catherine later in life, she doesn't feel simply misunderstood, she feels unstable. She swings violently between affection and cruelty. She provokes, she withdraws, she lashes out, then collapses into illness and despair. And when Heathcliff overhears her say it would be wrong to marry him, she knows the damage that could cause, yet she continues speaking. And when she realises he's gone, she doesn't take responsibility. Instead, she spirals and everyone around her pays the price. There is a moment when Nelly observes that Catherine delights to act the little mistress, fully aware of the power that she holds over those who love her. I mean, that awareness matters. Catherine is not careless in the way a child is careless. She knows the effect she has. She simply refuses to moderate it. Her marriage to Edgar Linton often looks different too, with age of course. As a teenager, it can feel like a tragic compromise. A young woman forced to choose safety over love. But as an adult, it looks much more deliberate. Edgar represents comfort, refinement and social elevation. Catherine openly admits that marrying him will allow her to help Heathcliff rise in the world, while still expecting Heathcliff to remain emotionally bonded to her. She wants both worlds, and when that proves impossible, she punishes everyone for the reality she herself has helped create. Rereading this as an adult, especially as a parent, can be deeply unsettling. Catherine is not merely someone acted upon by society, she is someone who acts forcefully and often selfishly, and then recoils from the consequences. That doesn't make her uninteresting. If anything, it makes her more so. Emily Brontë does not ask us to like Catherine. She asks us to watch her, to sit with her contradictions, to recognise that intensity is not the same thing as sincerity, and that passion does not cancel out harm. And I find myself wondering now, each time I return to the novel, do I feel more sympathy for Catherine or less as I grow older? And does the novel want us to excuse her behaviour or simply understand how a woman like Catherine comes to exist in a world like this? One of the most striking differences between rereading Wuthering Heights as a teenager and as an adult is how visible the violence becomes. And not just the obvious dramatic moments, not just the blows and the threats, but the constant grinding presence of emotional cruelty, neglect and psychological harm. As an adult reader, you start to notice how often people are frightened in this book, how often doors are locked, how often someone is isolated, silenced or deliberately humiliated. There's a moment where Isabella describes Wuthering Heights, the house, as a place where she lives like a captive, afraid of every sound, of every footstep. That sense of fear is not occasional, it is the atmosphere of the house. You also notice how rarely anyone feels safe. Children are shouted at, struck or deliberately degraded. Hareton grows up knowing only contempt, trained to see himself as a lesser, spoken to as though he's stupid until he believes it. Even Nelly, who often feels like a steady presence, lives in constant negotiation, managing tempers, preventing explosions, never fully at ease. Joy, when it appears, is fleeting. A laugh, a moment of closeness, a brief sense of belonging, and then it's punished. Catherine's happiness is followed by illness. Isabella's romantic hopes collapse into terror. Even moments of peace at Thrushcross Grange are fragile, easily shattered by intrusion or resentment. And perhaps most unsettling of all, as an adult, you begin to recognise that almost no one in this novel actually seems to like anyone else. There is very little warmth here, very little kindness offered without condition. Affection is almost always tangled up with power, jealousy or control. Conversations are sharp, defensive, loaded. People enjoy each other rather than enjoy one another. That bleakness is something many adaptations try to soften. Films and television versions often need clearer emotional anchors. They need someone for you to root for, someone to love, someone to believe in. They shape Heathcliff into a romantic anti-hero and Catherine into a misunderstood heroine and Edgar into this sort of dull obstacle. Because audiences expect a moral centre and a story that rewards feelings. Emily Brontë was not writing for cinema cues in mind. She was not smoothing those edges or offering comfort. The novel does not organise its characters into goodies and baddies. It presents a closed world where cruelty breeds cruelty and where tenderness is fragile, precisely because it has so little space to survive. When you read it young, that atmosphere can kind of blur into the background noise. But when you read it when you're older, it really presses in. As we get older, our relationship with the secondary characters often shifts in unexpected ways. When we first read Wuthering Heights, it is very tempting to treat Nelly Dean as a steady moral centre. She feels sensible, practical, grounded. She survives and she tells a story. And because she speaks so confidently, it's easy to trust her. But as an adult reader, that trust starts to feel uneasy. Nelly withholds information at crucial moments. She chooses what to say and what to leave out. She judges Catherine harshly, sometimes with more severity than compassion. She interferes when it suits her sense of order and steps back when intervention would be uncomfortable. And because she's our primary narrator, her bias quietly shapes everything we think we know. She's not malice, but she's not neutral either. She believes she knows what is best and she acts on that belief, even when the consequences are devastating. Reading this as an adult, it becomes harder to see her as simply sensible or kind. She feels human, flawed, morally compromised, capable of both care and of harm. Edgar Linton undergoes a similar sort of shift. As younger readers, many of us dismiss Edgar as weak, dull, or unworthy of Catherine's passion. He's calm, whereas Heathcliff is intense. He's polite, where Heathcliff is wild. Safe, where Heathcliff is dangerous. And in a story dominated by extremes, that can kind of feel boring. But with age, Edgar starts to look very different. He tries to build a peaceful home, and he values stability, kindness and restraint. He sets boundaries, particularly when Heathcliff returns, not only out of jealousy alone, but out of genuine fear for Catherine's health and her safety. He wants quiet, he wants order, and he wants a life that does not constantly hurt. And yet, that desire for stability comes with its own discomforts. Edgar does try to control Catherine's environment. He manages who she sees, what she's exposed to, and how much emotional strain he believes she can bear. His care slides at times into restriction. His love is gentle, but it's also conditional. He loves Catherine best when she fits into the calm and contained world he's trying to build. And as an adult reader, this is where the novel becomes unexpectedly unsettling. There are no easy moral positions to occupy. Nelly is neither villain nor guide. Edgar is neither hero nor fool. Their choices make sense, and yet their choices still cause harm. Their good intentions don't prevent damage. Rereading Wuthering Heights later in life, we stop asking who we are meant to root for. Instead, we start noticing how often people act from fear, pride, self-protection, or the desire to impose order on chaos. And perhaps that is one of the most adult realizations the novel offers. That harm does not only come from passion or from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from trying to do the right thing in a world where there is just no clear answers. One of the biggest shifts that comes with age is protectiveness. When we read Wuthering Heights as an adult, especially if we're a parent or a carer, our attention starts to drift away from those grand passions and towards the people who have the least amount of power. We stop watching the storm on the moor and we start thinking and worrying about the person that's caught standing in that storm. It becomes impossible not to think about the children in this novel. Hareton's story is one of the most quietly devastating. I mean, he's not born cruel or ignorant, he is made that way. Heathcliff deliberately strips him of education, affection, dignity as an act of revenge, repeating the very neglect and humiliation he once suffered himself. And as an adult reader, this is no longer just part of the plot. It feels like sustained abuse, carried out over years with intent. Cathy Linton's childhood begins in relative warmth, but even she's not spared. She's confined, manipulated, lied to and isolated. And her curiosity is punished. Her world is shrunk by other people's resentment. Reading this as an adult, it is so hard not to feel a tightening in the chest at how quickly safety disappears and how easily authority is misused. What becomes clear is that cruelty in this novel is not contained. It spreads, it repeats, it inherits. As younger readers, we might be swept along by the intensity of feelings, by the drama of it all. And as adults, we begin to read Wuthering Heights as something closer to a warning. A study of what happens when harm goes unchecked, when trauma is passed down rather than healed, when power is used to wound rather than to protect. And yet this does not make the novel less powerful. If anything, it makes it more so. But Emily Brontë does not rescue her characters. She does not step in to correct the damage or offer easy moral lessons. She does not pretend that love automatically redeems or that suffering produces wisdom. She allows the consequences to unfold slowly, painfully and honestly. And as an adult reader, we are far less able to look away from that. We notice what is lost, not just what is felt. We grieve for the childhoods that are stolen, the gentleness that has never had a chance to grow, the lives shapen by other people's unresolved pain. And perhaps that is that final shift of rereading this book later in life. We stopped asking whether the love is romantic and we start asking who is harmed, who is protected and who should have stepped in sooner. Oh, I'm getting warm. I think because I'm getting quite animated. That's the correct word, isn't it? Rereading Wuthering Heights as an adult is not about ruining romance or becoming clinical. It's about recognising complexity, about understanding that intensity is not the same as intimacy and that passion is not the same as care. It's about learning to see how suffering may explain behaviour without ever excusing it, and how love, when tangled up with power, control and obsession, can become something damaging rather than sustaining. This is why rereading matters. This is why slowing it right down matters, because Wuthering Heights is not a novel that gives itself to us all at once. It changes as we change. What we notice depends entirely on who we are when we arrive at it. Did that make sense? It did in my head. As younger readers, many of us are drawn to the drama, the defiance, the sense of love that feels overwhelming and absolute. But as adults, we begin to notice the cost, the harm, the children who are neglected, the women who are controlled, and the cycles of cruelty that are passed down rather than broken. And this is where the current film conversation becomes so interesting and so unsettling. Emerald Fennell has spoken about shaping her adaptation around how the novel felt to her when she first read it at 14. That teenager response, intense, emotional, romantic, is clearly powerful, but it raises an uncomfortable question. The film is rated a 15 in the UK, which means that the girl who first imagined this version at 14 would not legally be allowed to watch it. For viewers outside the UK, that rating indicates content considered unsuitable for younger teenagers. So who then is this film for? Is it for adults, inviting them to revisit the story as they once saw it and perhaps to recognise how their understandings have shifted since then? Or is it presenting a teenager reading of the novel back to an adult audience without asking us to challenge it? And more broadly, what are we teaching girls and young women when stories of abuse, control and emotional cruelty are framed through the language of romance and destiny, and then kind of presented through beautiful costumes and sweeping landscapes and carefully lit interiors? On the page, Wuthering Heights is harsh, it's uncomfortable and often deeply unappealing. But on screen, suffering can start to look cinematic. Control can look like devotion. A violent, restrictive life can begin to resemble something intense, meaningful, even enviable. When intensity is mistaken for love and endurance is treated as proof of depth rather than a warning sign, the danger is not in the story itself, but in how easily it can be made to look attractive. Emily Brontë does not romanticise this world. She does not rescue her characters. She does not soften the consequences. She leaves us with the damage and trusts us to sit with it. Perhaps that is why Wuthering Heights endures. Not because it gives us answers, but because it keeps changing the questions. And because it asks something of us as readers, to grow, to recognise and to look again. I'm sure my nose does this on purpose. The minute I start talking, it decides to be all tickly and... And there is no later revelation. There's no later revelation. That Heathcliff took pleasure in thwarting his desires and derailing Degrading. Come on, Kate. It's not hard. And deraging. Degrading is the word I'm trying to say, but when it comes to saying it, I don't say it. You also, I'm just going to start that bit again because that was just rubbish. Has so little space to survive. Survive. So let's leave the church and leave the graveyard and make our way down the path beside the car park, and let's go and explore a place where this time of year it's always so dramatic. And I'm not just talking about the famous tea van. And here we have the River Swale. And just so you can see how loud it is when you walk down this path, I'll turn the music off and the volume up. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. And I've got my famous 3 questions. So if you could pop your answers in the description, that would be great. Number 1, when did you first read Wuthering Heights and how old were you at the time? Number 2, what do you see now that you didn't see back then? And number 3, do you think this is a book we only begin to understand by returning to it again and again at different stages of our lives? Thank you so much for watching this video and all my other videos. I am so grateful. If you like this video, then please do a likey, subscribey, hypey thingy, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Brontë content. Have a good weekend, take care of yourselves, and I will see you all the Friday after next for more Brontë adventures. See you then. Bye.